It's far easier for people to accept the similarities between the parts of Nubia and its near neighbors like Chad, like Libya, and even the Nigerian areas. But this is not the limit. As I mentioned before, they did have their presence in the West, but several scholars who write about the western southern parts of Africa detail seeing Nubians in that region and assuming that they came directly from that area of Nubia. But if we move away from this connection that would connect Nubia with the higher parts and also Nubia with North Africa in general, including the Songhai, we then see another path of Nubians, two actually, which is why now I'm showing the southern parts. The first one goes all the way to Gabon. In Gabon, like every other part of Africa, Nilotic people have arrived in that area. The second one is through East Africa. We know definitely that there were people from East Africa who arrived in this area, and their DNA is still represented to this day. But the interesting part is that of Western Southern Africa. The reason for this is because over here, you see the same variety of languages that you would see if the people had been there for a long time. One of the parts of a book, The Reporter from the Kingdom of Congo, which gives us a clue about this, although some people have suggested that this part of the book is not as informed as it claims to be, is from Duarte Lopez, where he says, Duarte Lopez also says, tells us that the consequence of this people being so cruel, he's talking about the Anzinku, they were not traded with, excepting in so far as they came to Congo, bringing slaves of their own tribes and from Nubia, a boundary of their country with such things besides. So this information might come across as a bit weird, considering the fact that the kingdom of the Anziku, also known as the Tio kingdom, is very far away from that of actual Nubia. So Nubia all the way in East Africa, Northeast Africa. And so this person claiming that they are their neighbors seems like a mistake. This might be true, but there's three theories, and let us first discuss the first one. But I want you to locate the word Tio right at the bottom. At the bottom of the page, it says Kingdoms Tio. It's the one hatched diagonally, which you will see there is in Congo. So hatched diagonally in Congo. Nubia, of course, is far away from here. So what is he talking about when he says Nubians? Well, this is because of the travel of the Nubians or the Nilo-Saharan people. This gives us more evidence that there were people who were of Nilo-Saharan origin in this region. But he assumes that they come directly from Nubia. But this makes sense when you consider where Nubia is on their maps. So Nubia to them includes the parts of Africa, which would be the Kanem Bornu, which is close to Nigeria and places like that, and even would touch parts of Cameroon. So you can imagine some people who come from Cameroon, the northern parts of Cameroon, who had some contact with that of the people in South Africa. And with this communication, they say, oh, so they gather a few slaves from that region, not knowing because they could tell. I mean, there's another part of the book that details the difference between Nubians in the way they look and other Africans from this region, but it's so racist, I don't even want to read it. If we read from Wikipedia, the enemy of the people, according to some people, we can see there that there are some languages in Cameroon and even further south, as you will see, that are these Nilo Saharan languages, which, by the way, to some degree could be considered Nilo Saharan and then further south, languages. And you can see here it says, if you go to native to Chad, Cameroon, Nigeria. I'll say that again: Chad, Cameroon, Nigeria. You'll start to notice that we are getting closer and closer to Congo by doing this. So in Cameroon, you can see that these languages are in this region. Now, of course, this language is considered native. So the first theory is that they traveled from Nubia and ended up here and their language got changed. The second theory is that it's native to this region. So it's been here for a very long time in this area. And the third theory, of course, is that it's very recent, the type of movement. But if we take the fact that we know for a fact that there's a language in this area that is related to Chad, related to Nubia, and at one point was part of a giant network that moved from one point down to the bottom. And the people, the Europeans, were familiar with Nubians. They know exactly what they look like. So when they saw Nilo Saharan looking people, they just assumed that those people came directly from Nubia without knowing. Now, remember, this area over here of Cameroon would have been called Biafra. And so Nubia to them is the area just above Biafra. But if you go back to Wikipedia and you scroll down, you will see there that there's a list. It's written Nilo Saharan, Central Sudanic, Bongo Bargirmi, Sara languages, West, and Gambai, which is the language that is spoken in Cameroon, Nigeria, and in Chad. But what do these things mean? Well, these are some of the Western Southern languages that would be found in the region, which is why they are written down. So, without a doubt, we know that there are Nilotic speakers who exist in this area, or Nilo Saharan speakers who exist in this area, who embody the genetic history of the Nilotics. But if we look down again on this Wikipedia, we can see here the Sara languages, which again, Chad, Central African Republic, that's where the Sara languages dominate. And by the way, the Sara languages are part of the Bongo Bagirmi languages, which also includes Nigeria. If you look right in the middle of the African map, you can see there Central African Republic, which borders Rwanda and Cameroon. Again, very close to Congo, where the Anziku would be found. This is why this exists. It's not just some mistake from his part, meaning it's him just connecting places, or another theory, which is that when he describes these slaves, he's talking about people that the Anziku would travel all the way to Sudan, which they call Nubia, and then come back and fetch people. Another one is that this area acted as an intermediary, but in real life, it's pretty obvious that they got their, not slaves, but there were some people from that area in Central African Republic and even Cameroon who made their way down to the Nziku side. And when they did, which they called Biafra at the time, which when they did, the Europeans who didn't have access to these regions just assumed, because the people looked like they were Nubians, that they were Nubians. They had access to Chad in the north, they had access to Sudan, they had access to Congo at the bottom. But this one region, which would be penetrated later in a book called The Dark Continent, this is way later, that is how we know that this Nubia is the one in the middle being talked about, and how we know that it's probably the Nilo Saharans. So for a lot of people, this also qualifies as evidence for why some history of Egypt must be connected to this area. And I don't know how you could dismiss that at all, because of course, the extension of the Sudanic empires was long. and was not even understood by the ancient Egyptians. That's why our history sort of stops for the Nubians around the borders of the Nile, because the Egyptians didn't really go any further than that. But what did the Sudanese know? Did the Sudanese, firstly, we're going to start with something. So around the Congo basin, that's where the Basenji come from, the dog. And so we know that there must have been some trade between Congo going up into that region. But more than that, we've got 4,000 years to do this, to have these languages spreading throughout the regions. Of course, we can also mention the fact that we've got 100,000 years before that to do whatever. So it's not limited to those 4,000 years, but that's a good period to look at in what part of that 4,000 year journey did people travel. Now, here's the problem: we talk about every other language traveling except some of these important Nilo Saharan languages. So, in this region, again, of Biafra or Cameroon and Central African Republic, you will see two other languages that exist. One is the Niger Congo languages, and the other is Afroasiatic languages. The Afroasiatic, again, might be home to those areas, but it also might be a sign of a further movement of languages coming in. The obviously the Niger Congo languages probably talk about the expansion of the Bantus in a way, but add that to the Sudanic languages that come down, and you have a completely different story, because they're not Niger Congo. And of course, according to Wikipedia, millions of people still speak these languages, and a lot of these groups mixed in with the Niger Congo people, so that whatever language they spoke before disappeared within the Niger Congo languages. So, do we connect this civilization and these Nilo Saharan movements inside within the greater Islamic movement? The answer is absolutely not. Even in Nigeria, the Islamic movement at that time sort of stopped in the Bornu regions, and maybe even the other side, because of the Niger connection. But if you go to Cameroon and you go further south in Biafra, these places would be isolated. And so, even though these people are Sudanic, they do not come with the rest of the culture of the Nilo Saharans, the Islamic thing that came with them, until later. And this is the special thing, the thing that separates it from it being a thing that happened during that time, because we know that the Nilo-Saharans then made it all the way to the Congo areas, didn't bring any of that education with them. They didn't bring any of that understanding with them. But the people did describe for them, the people, the Anziku, described for them, like they said, hey, there's people who live to the north. They build buildings like European built buildings and all of that. They gave, in the report of the Kingdom of Congo, they gave a full description of some of the higher areas that have this type of reality. And again, these are the clues that we get that tell us of this, which brings me to this person. So today, and I mean today, a lot of scholars in Congo, including Queen Diambe, they all believe that the Kingdom of Congo is a transplant or a home away from home from Egypt, and that they belong to a particular type of Egyptian sect, which would have the Order of the Leopard and all these other things that existed in there, and that their religion is just an offshoot of ancient Egyptian religion. Now, I have proven that the culture of the people of Congo is very similar to that of the culture of ancient Egypt, especially in terms of medicine, in terms of cotton making, in term just a bunch of things are very similar. And so there is no real contradiction except to say that I don't know how they got to there from one place to another. I don't know if it started in the center of Africa and by bifurcated, or if it started from Egypt and the news spread, or it started from Nubia and the news spread. But somehow these cultures do share some real historical ties. And that is the important part of it, to figure out where the similarities start and end. Thank you very much. We'll discuss this another time as well.